Good evening and welcome to Art Talk from Phillips Mill Community Association. I'm Laura Womack. Jen McHugh is our executive producer.
Hi, all.
David Stier's painting suggests layers of the natural world that are not always seen on the surface. Perceived as having a color palette of neutrals, David's work actually has a lot of color. The atmosphere of mystery perhaps contributes to the perception of a subdued palette. He's a thoughtful painter whose work reflects his keen observation of the physical world and his orientation to right brain thinking patterns. He writes that painting is a meditation, freedom from thinking, a journey into stillness. David Stier studied fine arts at Bates College, where he earned a Bachelor of Arts degree. He studied art for 4 years at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Art. He's a frequent exhibitor at the Phillips Mill Juried Art Show and has won many awards, including the prestigious Patrons Award for Painting. David has a solo show at the Silverman Gallery in Buckingham, opening on the 4th and 5th of December. Welcome to Art Talk, David.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And welcome to our audience. We're always very glad to have you join the conversation. Please put your questions in the Q&A where we can find it easily, and we'll take them as we go along. And David, let me start by saying that as I'm writing the introduction for you, I had a particularly challenging time.
Okay.
In our previous conversations and emails, I have so enjoyed learning about how your sensitivity to the intuitive or subconscious patterns of thinking work in your paintings. And, you know, words, as you know, have their limitations. And so I just wonder what it's like for you to hear people describing your work.
It depends. I hope that people find silence and stillness when they look at the work. I remember a friend of mine, his daughter came into my studio a couple years ago, and she looked at one of my paintings and she said, "Is that from a dream?" And I said, "Exactly." And there was something, really nice about, that comment. But I take, I'll take it as it comes, and it sort of depends on, conversation is.
Well, let's take a look at your artwork. We like to jump right in and see as much artwork as we can on Art Talk. And I know Jen's got a slideshow prepared for us. I'd like to just take a start right off the bat with the perception of color in your work, since that's something we've talked about before. And I think you get a lot of feedback about the neutrals and the subtones.
Did you want me to say something about this?
Yeah.
So this was painted in pretty much one shot. It's probably about 1.5 feet wide, maybe 8 inches, 9 inches tall. And it's along the Delaware, where I, travel a lot and paint a lot and draw a lot and think a lot. And so, I did a little bit of work with this. This is going to be in my show. It's one of the older paintings in my show. And, I guess it's from 2 years ago or so to maybe 3. And yeah, that was mostly it. It was, evening. And I just, some of them carry memories with them of painting what had happened. There sort of this one woman riding by on her bicycle, and then riding by along River Road. I was on the towpath, and or maybe she was in her car when she was going along, but she rolled down the window and yelled out the window something. I can't remember exactly what it was. So. Yeah.
There's obviously,
it's kind of unimportant, but yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to go on if you wanted to say more about that.
No. That was pretty much what comes to mind.
Yeah. So it has a sense of place and time for you.
Yeah, a lot of these paintings like this, they are, even though they're painted in one sitting, they're, I feel like they're, constructed from a history. from me looking over years and drawing over years. So, and then, it happens in a moment, but a lot of that information has been taken in over a period of time.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, there's obviously a lot going on in this painting. It's beautiful. And I think there's just a lot of color happening here. How do you feel when people talk about color in your work? In neutrals.
I don't see, you mean that it's more neutral, the palette is more neutral?
Yeah.
Or it's my taste and it's just, I don't really think about it that way. I'm just grabbing colors.
All right, good.
It's not an earth palette, though I have painted with an earth palette. This is prismatic palette and earth palette together.
Right. All right, good. Let's take a look at the next one, but I think you really see a lot of color. There we go. I love this painting.
Thank you.
Where is this, David?
That's Point Pleasant.
Right.
This is much more recent. I'm sitting on the bridge, not the bridge the little skinny bridge that goes over to where you'd go tubing.
Right.
If you know where that is. So that's where I was sitting, kind of pulled over on the side, looking down into town.
Good. And you've talked a lot about the interiority of your painting. And I think, that, as I said before, I've struggled with finding words that were adequate to your work to talk about it. And I think one easy way to access sort of that discussion, an easy and obvious one, is that you've talked before about how dyslexia has played into maybe your access to perceptions. Would you like to share some of that with us now?
Sure. I mean, I was thinking about this the other day. I was in grade school in the 70s. And I think a lot of artists have experience drawing in class and doodling in class. And that was definitely me. I think part of the difference is that some of the artists that I know who drew in class say that they were drawing as a way to help listen. And, fortunately or unfortunately, in my case, I wasn't really listening. I was completely drawing and immersed in drawings. And even when I wasn't drawing, I was, sort of retreated into my world, because my form of dyslexia has to do with as much or more to do with my ability to listen and hear and process what I'm hearing, not the physical hearing, but the way I process language. And so, that was the most severe part of my dyslexia, was trying to pay attention in a classroom situation to unfamiliar material that was, felt like it was moving very quickly, and I couldn't orient, and I, couldn't sort of figure out what the context was of what the teacher was saying. And so I can remember, and a lot of us artists have also very good long-term memories. We can't remember what we were going for in the next room, but remember the color of our grandmother's door when we were 3 years old, that we visited or something. And so I can remember the first lecture and being completely lost in school, in like kindergarten, and realizing that, but I was sort of tuned into what was happening visually around me. And then eventually, not too long after that, I was given a pencil and paper, and then I started drawing. And so had I been taken to a resource room or identified in some way as having dyslexia, because it wouldn't be till it was much older that happened, then I don't think, and if I had somebody helping me or was taken in a class, or I started thinking that maybe I wouldn't have spent all of those hours internalized in that, going into that world and drawing, and because I think it does have a lot to do with sort of the way I develop. Now, I don't necessarily recommend that, because it's a struggle not to be able to follow along in class and look around, and you're not getting good grades, etc. And so you retreat further and further inward. But if it doesn't kill you, then it might have a positive effect. And in some ways, because I survived it, I think it did have a positive effect. So this whole thing with dyslexia, where my brain is much more wired to think in pictures and visual and hands-on, and I'm oriented that way. And in that world, there's no real right and wrong in terms of directionality. It's the linear, the sort of left brain, the sort of the other side of the brain, that was more difficult for me to grasp, at least consistently. So creative thinking happens, and is actually at an advantage if in terms of thinking in different directions. Writing a B for a D, or making letters bottom up, or doing the things that we do in reverse is actually, I believe, is an advantage. And certainly thinking visually and in pictures, problem solving in pictures is an advantage. But you can't really get at that, in school, the way that you, in a way that is, or at least I couldn't, in a way that was satisfying to me, because I had to go through that linear process, either of listening or writing or reading or speaking. And so it wasn't, so that's where, that comes from.
I think you did put a lot of work into sort of working with your dyslexia and coming through your academic career, and then into your artistic career. And we'll talk more about that. But we do have a question from Jim.
Okay.
You know a little bit more about your young experience. Jen, can you help us out with that?
Yeah.
Sure. Jim wants to know, he wanted to know, did you draw all over everything? Books, desks? I think he means arms. I don't know.
Okay, I will tell you one story. So no, I wasn't a troublemaker until I got a little older. But I do remember sitting, when I would have to do homework, because you weren't paying attention in school, you're not a good reader, but you're still, in the 70s was so hands off, and you're sitting at home trying to do your homework. It's like, how are you supposed to do that? And so, I can remember back in the day, we had silly putty, and I'd have my lamp there, and I would just take like pieces of silly putty, just like stick it on the top of the light bulb, and, watch it bubble. So, it was like making a big mess, and like, or, getting completely distracted. There's a little bit of a metaphor for what was going on in my brain.
Yeah, interesting. And I think Karen
that's the worst thing I could think of.
I've heard worse. I've definitely heard worse.
Yeah.
Karen had a question about your color palette.
Okay.
Yes, Karen asked, do you use a limited palette when choosing your colors for a painting?
No, I mean, my palette is half prismatic, meaning cadmium yellow, cadmium red, vermilion, but cadmium vermilion, cobalt, and white, and then and also let's see, cinnabar green light, and chromium oxide green, and then on the earth palette side, it's mostly burnt sienna and yellow ochre, and French ultramarine, or just ultramarine, a few more in there.
So you've got a lot of color happening,
Well,
was there something there that you were going to say, David?
Yeah, I mean, that's what's, who knows what I'll be working with next week or next month or next year, but that seems to be, enough keys on the keyboard for me right now.
Right.
I know there's some a la prima painters who have a much broader palette, so that they can just, there's not as much mixing involved. And so you can, you've got, more out of the tube at your disposal.
But do you like to mix your own colors?
Well, they're mixing too, but yeah, I mean, I do. Yep, I'll get there, and sort of factor that into the painting time. You got to get there early enough, especially if you're working in multiple sittings outside, to get there early enough to start mixing the color, so that there's a lot of timing involved, especially if the sun's going down. Mm-hmm.
Right.
So I do, yeah, I'll spend a lot, I mean, more time than I realized.
Right.
So, and
because you're doing plein air.
yeah. I mean, I do plein air, and I paint in my studio, and I, work with models, and I paint still life and interior and all of that.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, John, let's take a look at some more artwork. That's what we love to do.
Okay.
What have you got next for us? Get that up. I want to say that, here we go. Yeah, David, tell us about this work. Again, lots of color.
So this is, it's actually on the wall behind, right here behind me. That's a very recent painting that's going to be in my show. And it is along the Delaware and along the towpath. And it is, I think it's a 3, like, did it in 3, days, meaning at that time of the day. I think it was 3. So it was one of those times I didn't make a drawing for this. A lot of times I will make drawings to work out compositions. But this is not one of those. I remember I was like riding my bike. I ride my bike all the time down the towpath, and I kind of like it just kind of hits me, and I screeched. I came to a stop, and something just told me to stop my bike, got off, and turn around, and I did, and I just knew that I was gonna, start a painting there. So, I have an electric bike, and I have this set up on the back where I can stow everything, and it allows me to get a lot of equipment, get what I need into places that would be more difficult by car. So that's that.
That's it. You've said that journey is a painting is a journey into stillness. I think this is a nice painting to talk about that with. Is that the process of painting is the journey into stillness, or the painting itself is the journey into stillness?
That's a great question. And, because painting can be excruciatingly difficult, and, so it certainly isn't always blissful. But there are many times that the painting happens for me before I'm painting. It's when I'm looking, and or if I've sort of painted this on the first day and I take that back with me, and then I'll have that in my studio, and I sit for quite a while and just, think in stillness, and sort of it's a conversation. It's hard to describe, but the painting kind of tells me it's a puzzle in some sense. You're trying to figure out, you have a feeling, something that you want to say, but it's a mystery, and you're piecing it together, and it certainly doesn't always work out. So there's always an element of, like, at least for me, is that this isn't going to work. I either abandon it or not happy with it or something happens. So, this one, when somebody passed me and he looked about on the second, when I was in the middle of the second sitting, and he said, "This looks like a good start. Looks like you have a lot of work left to do." And I was thinking, definitely, like, it was just, there was a lot,
Yeah.
to do. And so, but I didn't really answer your question. The stillness, it really depends. Like, sometimes it does happen in the painting. It doesn't usually happen that way outside, because it's, you're racing against time and things change very quickly, and it's a little bit more intense, at least for me. And some of the a still life set up inside, that's more sort of slow and contemplative, and but the stillness can come, it's part of the process, stillness and silence, and where you shift away from your thinking mind, which is really getting in the way of you being able to see, whether you're looking at a painting or so that's part of the reason why I mentioned meditation, because there's this relationship between meditation where you're going beyond you're stilling your mind, so that you're because the words, your thoughts that you may not even be aware of, is getting in the way of you being able to actually perceive life.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Well, Jen gets up another painting for us to look at. I'd like to pursue that a little bit, because I think you also talked about how, you've done a lot of writing about your work, and which I think is interesting, because you've come at that from, given your history with dyslexia and the work that you did in order to be successful academically, which you certainly did. That you focus that on a creative, and I don't love the terms right brain, left brain, but those are
right. It's a little bit of an oversimplification. Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
But you oriented towards the right brain, and yet you've done so much work, I think, in a sort of a left brain. My perception is you've done a lot of left brain work in thinking about your work and what it means.
Yeah, well, that's true. So two things come to mind. The first is that I owe the language fluency and processing that I have in all areas to the school that I attended between two colleges when I was in my late teens, early 20s, and that's the Lewis School in Princeton, where I've been involved in a part-time capacity for a long time now. So that I actually went back, and it is though not everybody's an artist who attends the school there's a lot of creative, three-dimensional, visual, hands-on kind of thinking among the students that happens and takes different forms. So that's the first thing is, so I have access to writing. I mean, I literally went back and learned cursive writing again, fluency, and all of that. But the second thing is that I'm writing. I haven't written, even though I had a capacity for a long time now. I haven't written much. What I've written and what I gave to you recently is the first things that I've written in probably 20 years. I mean, I maybe a little bit here and there, but that's part of the reason that I explained that I wanted to even, come on here and speak with you, because I didn't really feel prepared to do that for a long time, because it's working very intuitively, and I didn't have the words for it. And, I have notebooks that and there's very little writing in the notebook. The writing has more to do with, the technical aspects of painting and what worked, and, or thoughts, or, but most of it are just images. And but over this past year, it has, I've been wanting to write more about my work, maybe even start teaching at some point, or and speaking about my work. And that is because some of the process is, has revealed itself to me.
Right. Well, and just for the people who are listening, I want to thank you for what you sent me. Is when we were talking about doing this program, you sent me a lot of thoughts that I found so valuable and interesting, and so I really appreciate you sharing that with me and now with our broader group. So I appreciate that. And a lot of it really was, I think, about the creative process, and you've articulated it really well, and you've certainly articulated experiences I've had with writing, different forms of creativity. So thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome.
And let's take a look at another painting. Here we go. Let's find out a little bit more about this painting, and then let's talk about it.
Okay. Another, this is also coming up for, my show. I would say, some things about my still lifes is that I tend to, for whatever reasons, be attracted to certain objects. And there isn't necessarily a rhyme or reason. I just become, interested in certain objects, and you could have something very similar, but it doesn't quite work for me. And so the things that you tend to see in my paintings are objects that somehow have this kind of importance or meaning to me. And then that's a rose from a rose bush I planted last year.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So it seems like there's a strong tradition or feeling for the still life in Bucks County. Would you agree? That's just my observation as being involved with the art show over the years, and I see a lot of still lives.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so.
Okay. All right, good. What's up next, Jen? Let's see what she comes up with. And then let's take a look at some drawings after. There we I muted myself. And another still life. This one has meaning for you, David, or I may be wrong.
I think sometimes there's this feeling, I'm sure other, the painters out there, or it's not necessarily even related to painting. It's just like almost anything. But for me in painting, there comes a point where it sort of feels like it's happening itself, and I'm observing what's happening. It's really hard to describe, but it's almost like, there's work involved, and you're mixing color and cleaning brushes and setting up this and that, but somewhere in the meditation or the focus in a painting, the painting is telling you what to do, and it seems to be happening, like I said, on its own with me as an observer. And I think that, you have an idea in mind, but you also have to be open enough to, and listening enough to know what to do next. So there's a kind of, striving towards something, but also listening and watching, and willingness to change as well. I think that willingness to change is really important. And so this part of this, so that's that's, I don't know what else to say about that.
I love hearing you talk about it. It makes me think, and I could be completely wrong on this, but my understanding is that for some Chinese artists or East Asian artists, there's the concept of qi, of the line. And the artist has to get into a certain state of mind in order for
Yeah.
the qi, that life energy, to flow. And I mean, what you're talking about is a very delicate sort of listening to yourself, following the process,
Uh-huh.
controlling it, but not crushing it by controlling it too much.
Yeah, there's this thing I was thinking about it. It's like there's your will, and that's important. Like your willpower, you're willing yourself to do something. And that's important for sure. But there's also, and somebody once said this to me about another artist that she was curating for on Monhegan Island quite a long time ago. And she said that artist, whose name I can't remember right now, wished there's certain things you can't will yourself to do. You kind of have to wish it to happen. And what I mean by that is, you can't force it, and it's something that you want, a feeling, or and you're not even sure exactly what it is, but your subconscious mind is able to somehow, at sometimes, not always, accomplish that in ways that seems miraculous, in ways that your conscious mind wouldn't be able to do. So that's what again, it has more to do with if your ego and your words, your thoughts are very dominant, then it's hard for that to happen. So like I said, thankfully I sort of was training my brain from an early age to think in nonverbal ways.
Right. I think Jen has a drawing for us, and you said that artists tend to be attracted to other artists' drawings. I thought that was such a fascinating thing. Why would that be?
Well, you get to see the thought process and something that's visceral, as opposed to, you can't really see with a lot of, not all paintings, obviously, but it's harder to trace the artist. So, the seeds, a lot of drawing contains the sort of a seed of an idea. It depends on the purpose. I mean, drawings can be finished art in and of themselves, obviously. So it sort of depends on the drawing, but
right.
Yeah.
I think Jen and I were recently talking with an artist who does these incredibly detailed, finished drawings before she even gets to a more mixed media product. And it's just so fascinating, the thought that goes into it. And yet other people maybe are more, here's a sketch. And I gather that you don't like the word sketch. Why not?
It's a, yeah, this is actually one of the few. I don't paint a lot in artificial light. Not against it, but I just tend to prefer natural light. But this drawing happened to be done at night in artificial light in my studio. So it was a still life that I was painting in natural light, and everything's on wheels in my studio, and I just kind of pulled it over and started that drawing.
Nice. Okay, I believe we have a question from friend of the show, Jim. Jen, can you share that with us, please?
Sure. Jim says meditation is everything, but yes, the painting at some point takes control and it needs the artist to accept and agree. Yes? So I guess he's asking you that, David.
So read that one more time.
Meditation is everything, but the painting at some point takes control and it needs the artist to accept and agree. And then he's
accept and agree. I don't know. Like, I'm not sure. meditation is everything. At some point, the painting takes control, and it needs the artist to accept or agree, or agree or not. I have to think about that. I don't know.
I mean, the way I interpret and understand that is, you come to it with that conscious will that you're talking about, and you have to be open to, the changes, as you said, and at some point, maybe that those changes take on a life of their own. Maybe it feels external, but that's obviously that internal process that you're talking about. And that's how I interpret it. And I also, I was thinking before, when you were talking about that process, that in order to really be ready for it, you have to have put in all the work of studying and practice and, all of that background for you to be able to accept, as Jim says, that inspiration.
Yeah, I mean, it's different. There's no two ways. Things are very different. And I think a lot of it is experience and just knowing what to do in the moment, and knowing, knowing how to react or what to do, whether to draw, whether to go outside, whether to do nothing, whether to, and that just comes from, working over a long period of time.
Right, exactly. You need to have your skills sharpened so that they're ready when you need them, and you get multi-state.
It is amazing to me sometimes how many things have to come together to really work. But sometimes it just seems to happen easily, and sometimes it's very difficult. So you never know.
Right. And Jen's looking for the next slide that we'd like to look at. You were talking about at some point, there's when does something become art? We were talking about drawing, the role of drawing, and sometimes drawing is a finished product. But, can you talk about that? When do you know something is a finished product and when it's a study?
I mean, I'm wrong still sometimes, and there are a lot of things I probably shouldn't have painted over. And, I know that because things that I intended to paint over that I forgot to because the sun went down. And then 3 weeks later, I realized I'm, glad, that was where to leave it. But, it's something that you just learn, experience. But when is something, so, that's it's a deep question, right? What is art? When does something become art? Is it objective? Is it subjective? But we feel it, we know it for the most part when it is. And, so I feel like the most essential thing we can talk about and analyze, everything that you would in art school: temperature, palette, grounds, brushes, light, everything. But and you can use that to try to analyze a composition. But the thing in a composition, to me, that is the most important thing, you can't really talk about. We don't, you might think you can if you sit in front of a Rembrandt painting and you're talking about it and analyzing it and verbalizing about it. But the actual thing that is so magical about masterworks is something that really goes beyond analysis. It may need all of those elements of and the technical aspects of it, but it's using those technical aspects to say something that I don't believe can be verbalized.
Right. Any quick thoughts here, David, on this drawing? I'm assuming that's a study for the finished artwork.
Yeah, I mean, I included those just to, and sometimes, and it's not always that I make a study for or decide that a drawing, there's lots of drawings don't become paintings, and some paintings never had a drawing. But in this instance, you can see, I was interested enough in that to continue and make a painting, but with some adjustments, and part of those adjustments happen to, be because of what's available, what's blooming that day.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, good. Well, we've had a request for human figures, some of your people.
Okay.
So we're going to take a look at that. And I think Jen had one in mind. So I want to talk too about the, here we go. The young girl who said she had asked you if it was in a dream. And I sort of have had that feeling as well, David, about your works. It seems like there's more when you paint a tree or a landscape. It's not just a pretty picture of a tree. It feels like there's something more there. How do you do that?
Good question. I don't know. So sometimes I draw from life. This actually was sort of right in the middle of the pandemic, where things were really shut down and we didn't know a whole lot. And so that was the time period. And I work a lot from my imagination in notebooks, with various medium, with different pencils, with charcoal, with washes, with various, as a way to develop my imagination. And some of those works become something that I would show. And this is a small painting that happened very quickly and spontaneously, as if it were in my notebook, but it wasn't. So, yeah.
Nice. Okay.
I mean, some of it is, and some of it, is just ways of coping through the pandemic, and trying to find ways of expressing what was going on, both for me, but what I was feeling was going on at large.
Right. Okay. Jim, we've got a question from Jean. Can you share that with us, please?
Sure. Jean said, would you say, David, that you are acting as an instrument of the creative elements of the universe to come through?
Yes, I can say that, yes.
So what does that mean? Help me understand.
It means it's not really me in some sense. It is me, but it's kind of coming through me.
Right. So, and that's what all that work is about, the interiority of the process. Is that right? Is that sort of, is that the muse? Is that going into sort of a semi-trance state in order to be receptive? What does that mean?
It kind of is a kind of hypnosis. When I'm drawing, or from life, or in, my notebook, it's very much like hypnotized, because you're creating space and light and form, and it's a completely different sort of place in my mind. And so, but that imaginary place informs actual life. And in fact, in going to that space, I'm able to see in ways that I can't otherwise in life. And also it orders what I'm seeing, I become interested in certain things and not others. And so but it all happens by itself. Just if I spend 3 hours drawing, then it's going to happen that after, if I walk or drive, or doesn't matter where I am, it's going to change the way that I see the world. And it was Jacques Faber, who died, I guess probably over 10 years ago now. I studied with him in my early 20s. He lived around the corner from here in Buckingham. And I had studied with him long before I attended the academy. And he had shown me how to work in a notebook and develop your imagination and the importance of that. And I didn't quite understand all of it, but he had given me enough to let me know that it was an important part of, being an artist.
I think you also said that he helped you find a way to work even when you weren't inspired, which is, I think, a fascinating concept, because if you wait for inspiration, it's a very passive process and you're at the mercy of, when inspiration strikes, which isn't necessary. I mean, maybe there are ways you can promote it, but it's not something you say, I'm going to go to the store and get inspiration today, and then I'm going to do a painting, So I think that concept of being able to work when you're not inspired, what does that mean?
Well, it means that you have to shift your expectations a lot of times, because I feel like we get attached to material things and you have to let that go. So there is always a way to work, but sometimes your mind again, or your attachment to something material, might want something that isn't really the next thing to do, and you're going to find that out the hard way. And there is an ebb and flow, because I do some other things as well, and I have to work it around and juggle with some other things. But sometimes we want to have something, we want it finished, we want it and we want it just the way we want it, but it may have been more important to do something else. So I think in changing your expectations, where where it may be fine to just sit in your studio, and that may be enough. Something might happen there with doing nothing but sitting in your studio that would tell you a very important next step to take, that had you gone out and made a painting, in that moment, it may not have been the right thing to do. It's about shifting expectations. So I think, it could be sitting down and writing, or looking, or but the longer that is, just finding that space when it's right, where you're involved, is takes you over time. You learn what to do when, faster, and then there's a certain confidence with that, because it's hard. If you fail at something, you're not going to want to run back and do it again. So you have to define success a little differently, and that could be knowing when to draw, knowing when to work in your notebook, knowing when to paint, knowing when to push, knowing when to pull back. It's ongoing. I mean, but you do get better at it over time.
Right. Okay, Jen, we have a question from Karen. What's up with Karen?
Karen wants to know, David, working the way you do you ever do commissioned paintings?
No, not now anyway. So I don't know what it is. I can't, I'm not even sure why, but I really have an aversion to that. And I've tried, But something is too stubborn in me. I don't know, there's something.
Well, I think what your work is about your internal exploration. So I mean, it's too bad because I'm sure there are a number of people who would love to commission a work of something that they want to see you paint. But if your work is about what's happening inside, I think that might be hard to do.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't rule it out entirely. It's just where I'm at right now. I'm not interested. I mean, if I needed to, maybe I would, but I don't, so I'm not.
Okay, that sounds good. You also, I think one of the important things about your artwork are the frames you make. And a lot of artists, I've had conversations with many artists, some of whom say, like, you're buying the painting, the frame is not important. And they get very upset when people say, well, I don't like the frame, so I didn't buy the painting. And then there are artists like you who, think the frame is so important that you make your own. And I'd love, Jen, if we have a picture to see the beautiful frames you make, which I think go beautifully with your painting. And painting wouldn't work in every frame. So,
yeah.
Unfortunately, we don't have a picture, but fortunately, look.
Here we go. I mean, they're very specific.
So yeah, so you can see this is a new way that I've finished the frames recently. So
yeah, and so like a gilded curly Q frame.
No gild. I did gild some in the past, but I didn't want to do that.
It's a very different look and mood. So where do you stand, David? Clearly the frame is important to you.
The frame is really important. There's a lot of pressure because the painting will, look better or worse depending on the setting that it's in. And it has a potential. I mean, you can take, it can make it look a lot better or a lot worse. And it's a very important decision. And my thinking is, it would be stressful and expensive to have somebody frame, let's say, the 25 paintings that I'm going to be showing. That would be hard for me to pick out all those frames and something that matched each. So it's actually more enjoyable and easier for me to try to, finish the frames in ways that are suited to that particular painting, which typically means changing temperature and, the transparency and opacity and that kind of thing.
So we're just about out of time, David. So I have time for one last question for you.
Okay.
I'd like you to expand on a statement that you said. I find your writing as intriguing as your artwork.
Wow.
Yeah,
thank you.
You're welcome. You said the real subject is the artist's state of consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us about that.
Yeah, if I don't know if you have this experience, if you go to a museum and you're looking at master paintings, master sculptures, master artwork, and you're not sure what attracts you, why you're there, but you get attracted to something. And if you quiet yourself when you're, observing, when you leave the museum, you're changed. And you may, for me, see the world differently. And sometimes a little bit through the artist's eyes who you had observed their work. And I believe, that is ultimate, comes down to those masterworks is a state of consciousness, is a state of mind. And it orders the composition in ways that communicates subconsciously and those are the enduring works of art. And, they can look very different. They can be abstract, they can be very refined, they can be large, they can be small, they can be everything. But that thing that, that they're touching is universal. It's something that tells us something about ourselves, about being human. And that's part of what makes art important.
Beautiful. David, you have been so generous in sharing with us about your work. I do believe that art is communication, and you certainly communicated with us here tonight and through your work. And I thank you for sharing that with us.
Thank you very much for having me, Laura. It's my pleasure.
Thank you, everyone in the audience, for joining us today. We always like having you with us. Our next talk on November 28th, Jen and the ArtTalk team have planned a special program for you for our Thanksgiving program. For this family-oriented holiday, we've asked families of artists, families in which there are multiple artists, to share what it's like to be part of a so-called art family. And the artists have produced the show themselves, basically in consultation with Jen, our executive producer. Jen McHugh.
Yes.
Thanks for that, Jen.
It's their words. It's all their words. I'm just adding little stuff.
That's right. And also with the support of our content producers, Dennis Riley and Jean Mahitch. Thank you, everyone, for Phillips Mill Community Association and ArtTalk. I'm Laura Womack. Good night.